assistance in the Valley for quite some time. And today's workshop is, as I said, focusing on sort of the ins and outs of forming a nonprofit tax-exempt entity. So let's just jump right in if we can. And by the way, you should know that if you are interested in forming one of these things, that every couple of months we do something called the Nonprofit Academy, which is self-coaching for people on how to form a nonprofit and get tax-exempt status. So just let me know at the end. You could just put it in the chat if you want. If you want to sign up for that, the next session on that, well, if you're only needing tax-exempt status and have already formed your nonprofit, then you could jump in early January. If you need to form the nonprofit, then you might need to start in February when we start the next one. So, but here you go. Let's get started. So today's agenda. We want you to know the sort of rules of the game for tax-exempt nonprofits. What do California and the IRS expect of tax-exempt nonprofits? Then we're going to give you a sense about how to form that nonprofit and how to then apply or obtain tax-exempt status after that. And then for anybody who wants to know, there's a little appendix at the end I cover, which is if anybody wants to know how nonprofits and for-profits can potentially collaborate with each other, because it's a little, it's a little careful. It's like porcupines making love. You got to do it kind of carefully, So anyway, let's get started. Rules of the game for tax-exempt nonprofits. Here you go. Here's a little quiz for you guys. First of all, is it true that to get the benefit of tax-exempt status, you have to apply to the IRS? Anybody know the answer to that one? Is that true or false? What do you think? Well, it's actually false, because there's a couple of ways. There's one other way you can do it besides obtaining tax-exempt status by application. You can be sponsored by somebody. I think it was Cassandra, you mentioned this as an option there. You can get another tax-exempt organization to sponsor your activities, and that way you don't have to file for tax-exempt status. Okay, now for organizations that already have tax-exempt status, here's a question. Is it true that they can't make any profit at all? Anybody know the answer to that? Looking at the chat a little bit here. Let's see if I can see it. False. That is false, right? The thing is that you have to take all of your profits and put it back into the organization. The main thing you can't do is profit share, meaning you give dividends or profit shares to other people. There's no like shareholders in a nonprofit. Okay, here's another one. Let's see. Go to the next one. You can't engage in any political activity at all. True or false? Another false. That's right. The main thing you can't do is that you can't oppose or endorse a candidate or a referendum. But you can do plenty of stuff underneath that. You can go and talk to legislatures about what you care about, more assistance to the poor, or, combat climate change, or things like that. You can talk to legislators, you can do education, public education, but you can't actually take a stand for or against a particular candidate or referendum. Is it true that you never have to pay taxes? Jesse, there you go. Jesse, boy, you're hitting 100,000% at this point. No, you may have to pay taxes. The way you may have to pay taxes is if you engage in activity that is unrelated to your tax-exempt status. And we'll go into that a little bit more later, but if you start like acting like a commercial business, or even if you start doing another activity that you haven't told the IRS about that is exempt, but it's not part of your exempt activities, you might need to pay taxes. And finally, this last one, is it always possible for donors to get tax deductions for contributing to you? That is also false, okay? There are only certain tax-exempt statuses. There's only certain tax-exempt organizations that can give these tax deductions. They are what's called the 501c3 tax-exempt organization. So let's jump into these rules real quick, okay? One by one. All right, well, first to think about is what's different Here you go. True or false, all CPAs know the rules? I don't know. It probably should be a CPA who knows tax exempt organizations. It's not everybody, I guess. So, oops, just missed my thing here. Okay, so what's different about being tax exempt? All right, well, you got to think about it sort of like it's a trust, meaning you are forming an organization, you are maybe getting some donations, you're maybe getting some grants, you're getting some assets in that organization there. But the main thing you should know is that the people running this nonprofit here have to take care of those resources. They have to make sure that they are using them in furtherance of their exempt purpose always. So it's like these are your assets, but you don't really own them yourself. It's really the sort of exemption the exempt organization that owns it and has to continue to use these assets for the exempt purposes. So here are the 4 rules that you have to always think about. First is you have to be organized and operated exclusively for exempt purposes. Okay, we're going to go into each of these in a minute in more detail. You can't have any private benefit. It's that thing I was mentioning here. If you get profits, if you have more coming into your organization than your budget requires, you can't just start passing those profits out to like your board members or something like that. You always have to reinvest it in your nonprofit. And then assets are permanently dedicated to exempt purposes. That means the assets that are in your exempt organization, if you close down, have to be given to another tax exempt organization. You can't just sort of take them home with you, you know? All right, and finally, this thing about no endorsement or advocacy against a candidate or legislation. Okay, so we're gonna go through these one at a time. All right, organized and operated for exempt purposes. So what you have to do when you start your nonprofit is you have to choose one of these exempt purposes that the IRS puts forth in IRS Code 26 USC Section 501c3. Okay, and you risk losing your tax exemption if you engage in activities that are unrelated to your exempt purpose, unless it's insubstantial in an amount. And we'll cover what that is in just a minute. But here are those exempt purposes, okay? So provide relief to the poor, distressed, and underprivileged. Often that's called charitable activities, okay? To advance religion, to promote education. And then you got some of these other ones here, like lessening neighborhood tensions, defending civil rights, eliminating prejudice and discrimination. Why am I showing you this? It's because when you form your entity, you have to say some of this language as you're describing the purposes of that organization. That's the first part of this rule, is you have to be organized and then operated for one of these exempt purposes or more. Okay, so you got to put them in your formative documents just so the IRS knows that you were organized to pursue this here. Okay. Is the activity related or substantial? Okay, here's that thing I was talking about. If you form your entity, you get your tax exempt status, but then you start engaging in activity that's unrelated to your exempt purpose, well, you might need to pay some tax on it. Here's an example. Let's say that you formed a soup kitchen for charitable purposes there. But then later you saw, well, hey, a number of these people could really use some education, maybe get their GED or something like that. Okay, well, that's fine if you start doing a GED program, but that's not the exempt activity that you set up with the IRS originally when you applied for tax exempt status. So you got to go back and you got to tell the IRS, hey, you know, we're doing the new exempt activity, this educational activity, and they'll be fine with that. That's great. But if you didn't do that and you started paying, you know, getting tuition for that GED program, that could be taxable income to you, you see. Okay, and then if you start engaging in different kinds of activities that have a commercial bent to it, we'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a second there. But so what is insubstantial? Okay, well, the IRS doesn't really give you a good idea about it, a good rule, but what we've seen in the rulings is that if you are, let's say that you, let's say you didn't know, you know, you started doing that GED program, you were originally a soup kitchen, you didn't know that you could get, you know, status for that too. Well, as long as you didn't put more than 15% of your organization's resources into that GED program, then you wouldn't, then it wouldn't be treated as substantial amounts of unrelated activity. Okay, so just know that you can do a little bit of stuff that's unrelated, but not more than 15% of your resources going forward. I'll come back to the chat in a few minutes. I just want to make sure we get through a bunch of this before, because we don't want to turn it into an hour workshop. So if your activity is unrelated, okay, let's say, let me think about this for a sec. Okay, here's something that some people do sometimes, is they might sell like t-shirts, okay, or tote bags or cups or something like that for your nonprofit. That's okay to do, but it's unrelated income that you get from that, because to be related income would have to be something like, let's say you're training youth to be entrepreneurs and make t-shirts. Okay, well, in that situation, you're actually furthering your exempt purpose to teach young people about entrepreneurship by having them sell the t-shirts. Okay, well, in that situation, you'd have related income. But let's say just somebody printed up some t-shirts for you and you want to use it as a fundraiser, you know, that's okay to do. You should know that the first $1,000 of that unrelated income won't be taxed, but beyond that, you know, let's say these t-shirts really take off and you start making lots of money on it. Well, then you have the option of paying unrelated business income tax on that after the first 1,000. And some people just do that. They make more money than, you know, that is unrelated to their purpose, and they want to just pay tax on it like any other corporation. That's fine. Just you don't want to get past that 15% amount, though, of your organization's resources to produce that income. But if you do start getting big with these unrelated activities, it's making a lot of money for you, you might want to consider establishing a subsidiary. This would be a different business that would be then owned by your nonprofit. That would then be able to make as many t-shirts as they want and charge us whatever they want, because it would be a for-profit business, but it would be separating out this unrelated business activity into a for-profit entity. So you might want to consider doing that. We can tell you how to do that at the end. Okay. All right, so here's some things. Private benefit. What is private benefit here? Okay, well, the basic rules is, yeah, no sharing your profits with anybody, no special perks for board members or staff. You know, my wife used to be, when our kids, you know, who are 25 now, were in daycare, the daycare center said, you know, hey, you know, thanks so much, board members, you're doing such great stuff for us. Why don't we give you a break on your tuition? No, that's not okay. It's not okay to do, because that would be taking some of the resources of the nonprofit and giving them to the board members. No, that's not okay. But you could give some private benefit to people incidental to accomplishing the exempt purpose. A good example here would be something like a nonprofit hospital. Okay, well, of course, individual people in the hospital are getting individual medical care, and that's great, but it's incidental to the hospital providing health care to the community, where, you know, there be people that are also, their medical costs are covered by the hospital because they just, you know, it's for people. Okay, so the idea is anytime you give some kind of private benefit, yes, it has to be incidental to providing or to accomplishing that exempt purpose there. Now, what about these generating revenue activities here? Yes, that's okay, but the main purpose needs to be exempt. So let me give you an example. So like Planned Parenthood, for example, they sell condoms and birth control. Well, do they do that mostly for the people coming into the Planned Parenthood? Yes. You know, you don't see billboards on the side of the road or something saying, come get your birth control from Planned Parenthood. No, they are serving their population, helping kids, young people or adults practice safe sex. To those people who are getting their services, they can sell them condoms and birth control. It's incidental to their additional, you know, exempt work that they're doing. Okay, well, what if you go further than that? Well, here's an interesting case. It was called Living Faith versus Commissioner. It was a bunch of Seventh-day Adventists, I believe they were in Utah, that were having some difficulty going out to restaurants and being able to practice their faith, which was very much tied to their diet. And so they thought to themselves, well, what if we created some restaurants that were sensitive to, our diets, that are so much part of our devotion? Well, the problem was that Living Faith restaurants then became like a chain that was really big, okay? So the first part of the IRS's inquiry was, well, wait a minute, these guys are competing with commercial businesses here. How could they have done this so that they didn't compete with businesses like that? Okay, well, one would be they could charge less for people who couldn't afford the full, meal, prices and stuff like that. Are they acting sort of differently than other restaurants that, for example, might have a, 2-for-1 family night or kids eat free or something? They had all of these different sort of aspects of commercial businesses that were generating so much profit that the IRA just thought this is competing too much with commercial businesses. And then this last part here, is it a reasonable scale? Yeah, they didn't need to do a chain of restaurants for their congregation. Maybe they just needed one restaurant to do for their congregation. So if you're doing this kind of activity that looks like it's competing with commercial businesses, you got to do that kind of carefully, and do talk with us if you have some questions about it, because we can help design. We help design a produce store that was going to be tax exempt, even though down the street there was another produce store. Well, this produce store was very distinct. It had a very educational mission to it. It was serving low-income students. It was different than like your regular produce station or something like that. All right. So these assets, number 3 rule, permanently dedicated to exempt purposes. This just means that anytime you have something of value, you have to get value for giving it up. So for example, there was an association of nursing homes that was approached by a medical supply chain that said, hey, what if we got, your mailing list for the people at the nursing homes here? Maybe some of them need some of our supplies. Well, the nursing homes can't just give that email. They just can't make that mailing list available for free because it has value. So they'd have to license it to the supply companies at a fair price, you see. Now, and then the other thing is just if you close down, you should just know that the Attorney General's office is going to have to sign off on your assets being, basically distributed to other 501c3s before they allow you to close down. And then there's this last part, no advocacy against the candidate or legislation. Yeah, well, the main thing here to know is that there are tax-exempt organizations like the Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, like the Independent Party, the Green Party. These are all 501c4 organizations that can take stands against candidates or legislation. They're just tax-exempt, but they can't give tax-deductible donations to people who are giving to them. So if you want to do a lot of advocacy, you might do something like the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club, has a 501c3 for getting out there and saving the trees and the whales and everything. But then they also have a lobbying arm that is a 501c4 organization affiliated with them. Again, you can create two different tax-exempt organizations. Only one of them, though, can give tax deductions. You see. Voter registration, voter engagement activities are okay, of course, as long as it's nonpartisan. Okay, so here are some advantages and disadvantages. The main thing for the advantages, of course, is you can get tax exemptions for almost, property tax, unemployment tax, franchise tax from the California. We'll tell you later that if you form a nonprofit and you don't apply for tax exempt status, you would still be liable for this California franchise tax, and you're starting in your second year of $800 a year. So you really want to get this tax exempt status to broom that out there. But it does come with some disadvantages. It is more scrutinized by state and federal governments. The 4 rules that you have to follow here, it's not for somebody who doesn't like paperwork, let's say that. Okay. All right, well, so now you know the rules. And this is something, by the way, that your board really needs to know. If you have a nonprofit, you'll have a board of directors, and they need to know those 4 rules going forward there. So how do we form this nonprofit? Okay, let's talk about nonprofit. You have articles of incorporation that you have to prepare. I can show you an example of it, but essentially it has to have this content in it here. Boilerplate purpose language, which says that we are going to do charitable and public activities in the state of California. But then you have to add this specific language here, specific description of purposes. So for example, you would say, we are going to further charitable purposes by creating a homeless shelter, okay? Or we are going to combat discrimination by doing, I don't know, a workshop series for folks who've been excluded from, different opportunities and stuff like that. And you see here, you also have to say in your formative document, the Articles of Incorporation, the 4 rules that we just talked about there, okay? And then finally, the incorporator has to sign it. Right. Now, one thing you should know is there are a few other things that you should put in the articles if they apply. So for example, if you want this organization to only be like for the next 5 years, you need to put in there, yes, this will sunset after 5 years. Here's another one, special board voting requirements. I always tell this story because it was so clever. We were working with a nonprofit, actually it was a consultant who did like historical archiving and talking about the Bay Area, okay? And when she wanted to form a nonprofit, we said to her, okay, well, as a nonprofit, you could either be the director, the paid employee for this historical society, or you could be a board member. But normally board members in nonprofits are not paid. You can only have 49% or less of your board paid, okay? Or you can be the main employee, but the board can fire you at any time. And so she came up with this idea. She said, well, gee, don't like that as a situation. I want to be paid. What if I put my brother on the board, and then we had a unanimous requirement on the board to dismiss the director, the executive director? Well, that was a brilliant idea, except a couple of things. First of all, that all board members have to show loyalty to the organization and not to the director personally as a relative, okay? And second, you'd have to put into your articles of incorporation that requirement that a unanimous vote of the board is required to get rid of the executive director. You see these special voting requirements. So it just wasn't going to work for her there, but it was very clever, I'll say that. We always put in this limitation on damages just because nonprofit board members are always volunteers. So why should they be subject to money damages? We just put that into our articles anyway. But this last part is probably important because there are some nonprofits that give over the voting on the board members to their membership. So for folks are a AAA member, like I am, every year I get a ballot from them saying, here are the board members, this one's running for this, make your decision. I would say about half of nonprofits are non-membership nonprofits. That just means that the board is voted on by first named by the incorporator, and then anybody who leaves, the remaining board members then replace them. So you just have to decide, and you can put this either in your bylaws or in your articles of incorporation, whether you want to be a membership organization or not. Okay. Finally, you take these articles and you either mail them or take them to the California Secretary of State's office. $30. Here's the little link about how to do that. And we can also, of course, help you sculpt these things at our nonprofit academy. Okay. And for the interest of time, I won't show you a set of articles, but it essentially looks like this, the things on the left here that you put in. Okay, so once you form your corporation, what do you do next? Well, okay, the incorporator names the first board. Of course, they could name themselves to the board there. But then the board has its first meeting and has to do a bunch of good things here, like approving the bylaws, appointing officers like president, secretary, treasurer. You should know that in the state of California, you'd have to have at least 2 board members in the for a nonprofit. the president is not supposed to be either the secretary or the treasurer. So you could have president and somebody combined being secretary and treasurer. But we tend to recommend 3 because, you could have deadlock there if you only have 2 board members. So why not have 3 board members, have 1 be president, 1 secretary, 1 treasurer. Okay. Then, of course, if you have employees to hire, you do that at the first meeting. You want to set up a separate bank account for the nonprofit. You usually want to get some liability insurance that will cover the activities of the nonprofit so that then the insurance will cover any damages that might happen. You want to, by the way, find this through a broker, an insurance broker, instead of an agent. A State Farm agent's a nice person, but they can only sell you State Farm insurance, whereas a broker can shop amongst, the best policies, the cheapest policies, that sort of thing. And then these additional filings you'd want to have the board approve, that somebody should file for tax exempt status, file this doing business as form with the local county to let them know what you're up to, register with the California Attorney General's office that regulates charitable fundraising. These are things that you have to do after incorporation. We do have a sample first meeting agenda that we can share with you when you get to that point there. Now, one other thing, oh shoot, where was it? The required filings, I'll come back to that in a second. So bylaws, we do have a template set of bylaws we can share with you, but this is the kind of stuff that's in there. Things like what are the board of directors doing, how many are there, what do they get to do, committees, you can form committees, things like that. All of this sort of stuff is standard in our nonprofit bylaws. We could show you there. And then, of course, these additional filings we were talking about. So we'll go over in a second the tax exempt filing here. But then you also have tax returns you have to put in every year. Even if you don't make any money at all, you have to put this in. It's usually a very little, check the box thing if you don't have much money, if you made less than 50K this past year. So we'll tell you more about when you file those things in a second. There's this thing called the Statement of Information that the IRS, that the state of California requires of you every 2 years. It's essentially just giving contact information on your board members. And then, as I said, you have to register with the California Attorney General's office because they regulate charitable fundraising. Now, there is this additional filing in Fresno, and I think it's primarily because they want you to not have to pay this business tax that they require for for-profits here. So there's a little bit of a process here, but you basically go and register on this Fresno government website here called the FASTER website there. It's $30 is a one-time fee, plus a $14 business tax certificate application. They will then approve or deny your application, and then you get to apply then to get this business tax certificate through this site here. And then basically after that, once you get approved, they don't bother you anymore. You just keep getting a license every 2 or 3 years. All right. So just know in Fresno, you've got that. It may be that that's the same in Merced or some of the other cities. Just make sure that if they have a business license or a business tax, local business tax, then there's probably an exemption for a nonprofit. So you don't have to keep paying those. All right, that's most of the game there. Now we're just going to cover at the end here, obtaining tax exempt status. So remember, there's 2 options here. You can set up a fiscal sponsorship, okay, or with an existing nonprofit, tax exempt, or you can file for tax exempt status yourself. But one of the most important things to know here, folks, is if you form a nonprofit corporation in California, in year 2, you're going to start getting this $800 a year minimum franchise tax. And the only way to get rid of that is to do number 2 here, file for your tax exempt status. You could file for the state of California's tax exempt status. It's a little bit like filing for federal tax exempt status. We could coach you through it, but otherwise you're going to be paying this $800 a year tax. So fiscal sponsorship. This is a possibility, yes. The main thing with nonprofit fiscal sponsorship you should know is that the fiscal sponsor is essentially giving you their tax exempt status to go out and fundraise with. Let's say you're the Little League of Fresno, you don't maybe even want to form an entity yourself. You want to just have a sort of an association of people doing this Little League, and they need tax exempt status because then, people can give them, uniforms and bats and stuff like that. Okay, well, here's the thing. If like the United Way of Fresno wanted to be the sponsor to the Fresno Little League, that would be fine. You set this up in a contract, and usually the 501c3 sponsor takes a little bit of a fee from, let's say the Little League got a grant for $10,000. Well, then maybe they'd take 1,000 of it or 800 of it to administer the grant there like that. But one thing you got to know is that the 501c3 sponsor can say no if the activities that you're engaging in don't further their activities. So first thing to know is that like the Humane Society of Fresno, for example, probably can't sponsor a Little League team. Well, I shouldn't say that. They could like buy uniforms and say, you know, we're the Humane Society Little League team, that's fine. But they couldn't offer a tax exempt status for the Little League team or for the Little League itself. That's because it's focused on preventing cruelty to animals. And so it's not really furthering their purpose to have a Little League team. Okay, so let's say it's the United Way. Okay, now United Way, let's say the Little League team got a donation of somebody who just thought they should travel in style. Let's say they got $10,000 to take limos to the games. Okay, well that sounds really cool. That would be wonderful, Little League team. I'd love to be on the Little League team. But let's say they wanted to funnel this donation through the United Way of Fresno. United Way of Fresno would say, that doesn't really further our purposes here to have these kids treated like royalty here. We just want to sponsor a Little League team. No, we're not going to let you process that donation through here. The donor could give you this themselves, but they're not going to get a tax deduction from us. Okay, so you just got to know the fiscal sponsorship does come with a little bit of strings. The fiscal sponsor does your tax return for you, and it's, you know, it's a pretty easy way to get started, which is nice, but you know, it's not forever probably. Instead, you probably want to be filing for tax exempt status yourself, and so you got to do this within 27 months of forming your entity in order to get retroactive tax exempt status back to the date of your formation. Otherwise, tax exempt status only goes to the date of your application. Now, what you need to do is decide, well, do you need to be able to give people tax deductions? Well, then you want to apply for 501c3 status. If you just want to be tax exempt, like a Chamber of Commerce, like Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation, or actually, I think Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation is a 501c3. So no, you're a 501c3. No, it'd be like your neighborhood association, where that's another kind of nonprofit that's tax exempt, but can't give tax deductible donations. And then those political parties I was talking about, the C4s, again, those are tax exempt, but they don't give tax deductible donations. But one thing you should know is that tax deductible donations, they matter less these days because people aren't itemizing their tax returns anymore very much from the 2018 tax law changes. But 501c3 status often is required still to get grants or government contracts. And so you'd either have to get that status yourself or get it through a sponsor. Okay, let's see, last thing here. Okay. Oh, and just know, here's that difference between the C3s and the C4s. Again, C3s are the only ones who do tax deductible donations, and you file a 1023 for that, whereas you file a 1024 for the C4. And we can help you with either one of these things. Okay, so when you do your tax exempt application, here you go. There's two options for feds. 1023 EZ, okay. You'll see a little bit of who can file those and who can't. If you can't file an EZ, then you file the full form 1023. Both are filed online. The EC is a little less expensive, $275. The full form is $600, a little bit more intense, putting that together. And then what you do is, as soon as you get your tax exempt status, you file your state tax exempt status with a form 3500A. You just attach the exempt letter. There's no filing fee. Then you become tax exempt in California. Okay, well, here's the threshold. Can you file your form 1023 EZ? The main thing is you have to be low income. So you have to think, is your anticipated annual gross income going to be less than 50K over the next 3 years? So let's say you anticipate, okay, well, this year we're only making 20. Next year we're going to make 40. The following year we're going to make 80. Okay, well, let me see, 20, 40, that's 60, 80. That's 140 over 3 years. Oh, you could still do the EZ because you're not, it would be $150,000 over the 3 years in order to average the 50K. So that sounds like you could do it. Otherwise, you have to file the full form there. Here's some other rules here. You can't have assets more than 250K on that sort of thing. So the question is, are you one of the kinds of organizations that's prohibited from filing your 1023-EZ? Well, you know, you can't do it if you're a limited liability company. If you're doing a church or something like that, you can't do a 1023-EZ. Check out this link here to find out whether, you know, you're one of the organizations that's actually excluded from filing the 1023-EZ. But if you have to file the full form 1023, you know, it's a little bit of a bear, but we can help you with it through our academy there. You just got to know it has all the stuff you got to put in it here. The most difficult part is this one here, this part 4 narrative, which is about 3 or 4 pages of just describing what you're doing, showing the IRS how there's a good ends and means fit between what you're doing and your purpose. So for example, if you wanted to combat poverty in, let's say, Atwater, let's say we want to, you know, so the purpose would be providing relief to the poor, distressed, and underprivileged in Atwater. And we're going to do that by standing out on the downtown street corner and giving out $50 gift cards. Well, the IRS would say that's not a very good ends and means fit there, because you just don't know who's going to be walking downtown. $50 gift card isn't really a whole lot of money for a lot of people. So you're going to have to do something that's a little bit more, how would we say, the good ends and means fit there by doing, yeah, like a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter or something like that. So they're going to want to see this kind of fit in your activities and purposes there. And then it's got all these different questions, check the box. It's really kind of annoying. You know, are you going to do bingo? Are you going to do things in foreign countries? It's just, you know, nauseating how many check the boxes you have to do here. You have to do a 3-year budget, and then you have to attach your articles and bylaws. You don't have to do that with your 1023-EZ, and then you file this whole thing online. And then just a couple of things you should know is that the IRS is sensitive about a few things. So if you are doing any of these kinds of things, then the IRS is going to need to hear a little bit more. You probably want a lawyer to help you here. So for example, you have your nonprofit having a really close relationship with a for-profit, and maybe one of the board members on the nonprofit owns the for-profit. Well, that looks like some possible conflicts of interest there. You're going to need to explain that a little bit more. That commercial activity I was talking about earlier, yeah, you want to describe that in a little more detail. If you're doing things in foreign countries, that one, you should know the IRS isn't really xenophobic about these things. They're just worried about discretion. So for example, let's say that you want to save the rainforest, you get donations and people want you to plant some trees in the rainforest. Well, what the IRS wants you to do in that situation is contract with a forester down in the rainforest to plant those trees. That's great. That would be wonderful. Not much discretion there. But if instead you said, well, now we're going to give the money that we raise to a nonprofit in Brazil that then is going to plant those trees, well, the IRS is more concerned that that nonprofit isn't a 501c3. They can't control it. They're going to want more from you on that. They're going to want affidavits from those board members that they're going to use these resources only for your purposes. You got to be able to audit their books, a number of things like that. So just know that any of these areas have to be explained a little bit better. And then, oh, and here's this annoying check the box thing. Okay, are you going to do bingo? Are you going to try and influence legislation? Are you going to do paid fundraisers? Anytime you check any of these boxes, they're going to want more detail from you. Are you operating a school or a hospital? Are you generating intellectual property? So you might want to get some lawyers' help in filling that out. Finally, financials. You got to do 3 years of financials, income and expenses. Just make sure that you explain, any of the miscellaneous things you have in your budget. And then there's a balance sheet, which is basically what you had in your bank account last month. You put those things together. We can coach you on that. The last thing, and this is the kind of last sort of confusing thing you just need to know about, is the IRS has this default. It says anybody that we are giving tax exempt status to is going to be deemed to be a private foundation. No, you don't want to be a private foundation. You want to be a public charity. Why do I say that? Private foundations are meant to be regulated more because they aren't beholden to the community, to a broad range of the community. For example, the Haas Family Foundation. Yeah, they got lots and lots of money, but it's run by the Haas Family Foundation. So the IRS doesn't like the idea that the Haas family could just decide, we don't want to give anything this year. We'll just sit on our money, let it grow. No, private foundations like that need to follow additional regulations that the IRS puts forth. They have to give out certain amounts of their money every year. They have to do more reporting. What you want to be is a public charity. And the way you show that is by choosing one of these 2 categories in your tax exempt application. Either that you are getting a broad base of support from grants, governments, or individuals, or you're doing the same, but also doing some income, related to exempt activities. Remember, that's like selling those condoms for Planned Parenthood. So either one of these, you check either of those boxes, then you're a public charity. You're not regulated nearly so much as a private foundation. Okay, final thing, guys, tax returns. Yeah, I can't tell you how many nonprofits have told me in the past, but we didn't put in our tax return because we didn't make any money. No, the IRS needs to know that you didn't make any money. It's May 15th. You got to get this thing in. If you had the income of less than 50K for the year, then you just check this little postcard. It's really easy to put this thing in. It's online. Same thing for the California state filing. Just don't miss it, because if you miss 3 years in a row, your tax exempt status will be revoked, and it's really hard to get it back. So, all right, guys, that's the main thing. And if people want to stick around afterward for a little bit on how for-profits and nonprofits work together, I can cover that. But why don't we take some questions at this point? Looks like we had a couple of questions in the chat. Send your questions to Q&A. How do we inform the IRS? Rena, what was that question? I'm sorry. You wanted to inform the IRS about what?
You said if we started doing something that was outside of our nonprofit, but it still could be something we can use for our nonprofit to
Oh,
further.
Yes. That's good. So remember I said that you have to do these tax returns every year. So what you'd want to do is you'd want to inform the IRS when you put in your tax return, essentially. Okay. If you use one of the 990 returns, it usually has a box that says, are you doing anything new? That's where you put that in.
Okay.
Got it. Okay. Other questions that people may, can you have paid employees? Oh, yes, of course you can. The thing is, with nonprofits, you have to pay them community standard, or what I'd say, community average salaries. So I just did this with somebody else. I was looking to see, well, let me see, what does an average pastor in Fresno make? And we looked it up, and it looks like somewhere in between like 40 and 60K was about what they make, or I think that was an associate pastor. Anyway, but your board needs to do a little bit of research on that before you set your salaries, so that then the IRS knows that you're not paying, too much in salary. You can pay, I think it's 5% more than the community average and still be okay. Yeah. Other questions that people might have? Again, if you're interested in being part of the Academy, you just chat me here, or just send, I'll have my email up here. Just email me. And as I said, we're doing another round of the tax exempt applications in mid-January. And then we're going to do the whole process, the formation of the nonprofit, and then the tax exempt status in February. So just send me an email if you're interested in being part of that. How many people for a board? Yeah, what I was saying was the California requires that you have at least 2 people. That's so that the president can't be the treasurer or the secretary, the second person has to be the combined secretary treasurer. But we recommend 3 because just, you know, if you have 2 people, it can create deadlock. Other questions? Feel free to speak up if you want. Yeah, unmute yourself. Or... What's my email address? Okay, let me put that in here. Yeah, just send me, yeah, maybe the best thing to do would be to just send me an email. Let's put this out here. It's wkel@law.berkeley, lee.edu. There you go. So just send me that, you know, do we have a location? Well, we're up in Berkeley, but of course everybody's online right now. So, so no, we do all of our, you know, the Nonprofit Academy virtually, you know, over Zoom there, so. Okay, well, if we've got just a couple of minutes, what I can do is let me do a quick overview of that nonprofit for-profit collaboration stuff. Okay, we'll do that in case you're interested. There are 3 options for nonprofits and for-profits to work together. One is contracting, which is pretty easy to understand because, like, I would guess, for example, even Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation probably pays a private for-profit custodian company to come in and clean the building. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. The main thing you just got to know is you can't really give breaks to for-profits because, again, your nonprofit resources have to always be protected, you know. So you always have to get reasonable value for your services or assets. And usually you want to do this in a written contract, of course. Now, here's an example of, let's say you're doing something that starts making lots of money, okay? And you're starting to, yeah, let's say, I mentioned that thing where, let's say you were doing some amount of like life coaching. Let's say your organization was doing some life coaching, and then you found that a number of very rich people were interested in paying for these services too. Well, again, if you only commit like 15% of your resources to doing it, to helping those rich people, then you're probably going to be okay. Best way to set that up would be that the rich people pay, you know, more fees on a sliding scale basis than the low income people. That would be one way of doing it. But if you find then that, you know, you're just finding if people are making money here, then you might want to create this subsidiary of the nonprofit. I think this is the way Newman's Own does it. You should know. Newman's Own, the foundation, the Newman's Foundation owns the company that makes the pasta sauce and the salsa and all of that. And so what they can do is just invest in the nonprofit can invest in the for-profit, control the for-profit, and yet the tricky part here is that they have to still operate separately. The nonprofit can't be involved in the day-to-day management of the subsidiary, you see. And the subsidiary then can just act like a full for-profit business. You can pay staff members whatever you want, you know, they can do commercial activities, whatever. So the benefits from this is that it protects the tax-exempt status of the nonprofit while still allowing the for-profit that it owns to repatriate profits from the for-profit activity tax-free. That means it can give dividends to the nonprofit tax-free. Isn't that great? Now, one of the downsides of this is you have to be kind of careful with the relationship between the two. The nonprofit couldn't do something like, they couldn't say, gee, director of our nonprofit, we've been paying you crappy wages for years. How about we put you in charge of the for-profit and we pay you a huge salary, you know, that the for-profit can pay you a huge salary. Well, the IRS doesn't like those kind of sweetheart deal situations there. They think there's some kind of conflict of interest there. So they're not going to let you, you know, basically take nonprofit leaders, put them in the for-profit and then pay them, you know, a hunky salary. Okay. So, you know, this is just the process for establishing the subsidiary. It's basically the same way as you create the for-profit or the nonprofit. You create the for-profit, then the nonprofit gives, you know, something of value to get the ownership share of the for-profit, and then, you know, you go forward on that. Again, you have to have separate entities, separate day-to-day operations and management stuff. The nonprofit can control the for-profit only by electing its board or the majority of the board. All right, the last thing is joint venture. Joint venture is a kind of a hybrid that doesn't happen very often, but you should just know that it does happen. So let's say you're trying to create affordable housing in your community. Well, the nonprofit can get like tax breaks and grants to support this, but it doesn't have the chops to construct the thing. So it's going to need to have a for-profit partner to then create the affordable housing. So they can form an LLC, limited liability company, where the major member is the nonprofit, and then the for-profit can also be a member. Let's say the for-profit puts in 40% of the capital for that LLC, they can get 40% of the profits. But the main thing is two things. Does the whole venture further the tax-exempt organization's purposes? Okay, so it's got to be a nonprofit that needs to, create affordable housing, help poor people. And then the second is that the nonprofit always has to be able to do its thing. It can't be restricted by the for-profit in any way in pursuing its exempt purpose. All right, did that generate any other questions that people might have? Let's see. Does this nonprofit have to have a business location address? Yes. Oh, I see. This question was, do you have to have a location? I thought you meant, do we have a location? I'm sorry. Okay. Do you have to have a location? No. At this time, you do have to have a mailing list, or excuse me, a mailing address, but you don't actually have to offer services at a location at this point. And then the final question was, do you have to report financials to the public? Yes, your tax returns are open to the public by the IRS. Anybody who asks for a copy of it has to be given it. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that was covered a lot. I know that was a little bit more than we expected, but hopefully that was helpful for everybody. Any other questions that people might have? Okay, well, do just email me at that address here, wcal@law.berkeley.edu, if you want to get in on our next Nonprofit Academy. And yeah, look forward to hopefully helping you in the future. Do sign up for these first and third Friday workshops through Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation. Let us know what topics you'd like us to address next time too, for sure. And thank you, Sandra, for hosting us.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And of course, thank you, Bill, Cal, for the opportunity to collaborate in today's webinar. And as mentioned, these webinars are hosted every third Friday. So the next one will be taking place January 2021. And if I am correct, that will be exactly January 15th. So we'll see you same Zoom platform, 1 p.m. So hope everyone has a wonderful holiday. Happy holidays.
And Happy New Year.